Hello. The war, Putin's war, as I would like to describe it, has stirred the conscience of the whole world. In the post-Second World War world, none could have imagined that this would have been really possible. After the Second World War, which has really ravaged the human race, the humanity as such, as we had known till then, nobody would have ever imagined that such a thing could have happened. During the Second World War, it used to be said that Poland was raped by both Germany and Soviet Union of those days. More pertinently, Hitler and Stalin, who divided Poland between themselves. That was considered to be a real rape, which actually is only to explain the gravity of the situation and the absolutely unacceptable nature of the way Hitler and Russia conquered Poland. No one could have ever imagined that one of the big powers would ever have the audacity to engage in that kind of action yet again. But now it has actually happened. Of course, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, which was for a brief while, but the whole world knew that Saddam Hussein was not, at least Saddam Hussein was, as the whole world knew, was a dictator with absolutely no remorse for any of his actions. So the world was really not shocked. But in the case of Putin, it's slightly different. Putin has been a kind of, in spite of however he's being described in the Western world, Putin is more of an autocrat than a despot or a tyrant or a dictator. There's a subtle difference between all of these, but I don't really want to go into all that right now because the focus is not that. The focus here is basically, it's going to be Putin's lose-lose war, even if he's going to win over Ukraine, which he's quite likely to do, what with the massive army that he has and the overwhelming power that he's prepared to employ. So there, he's likely to be he's likely to be winning the war. But regardless, that would still be a losing proposition for Putin, because the way the Ukrainians have been fighting has been absolutely admirable, and Putin's war, even if he wins, is going to be seeing a lot of, he may possibly manage to install a puppet government there in Ukraine. Like in the case of Belarus, such governments would act according to the whims of the Russia, the big brother Russia, which means Putin. But still, the insurgency that's likely to be there after the war, it's going to be really extremely hard to manage by an unpopular government, particularly. But we have to actually know the mindset of an autocrat, which Putin is, by all accounts. It's as they popularly say, it's my way or highway. Everything has to happen according to myself, my own whims and fancies, according to my own desires. All the other countries, the smaller countries around Russia, have to be only my satellite countries. They should, at no point of time, have the courage to defy defy or offend the sensibilities of the big brother Russia. That's exactly what he has actually been looking for, uh, which is something initially Georgia was not prepared to accept, and now Ukraine has not been prepared to accept. And that's something which Putin could simply not brook or tolerate. That's in essence the reason for this war, nothing more. Of course, Russia, it's reasonable to believe that Russia has had its own sensibilities. What if Ukraine and even Georgia, possibly some other time later on, are admitted into NATO, which is essentially a military pact, which means the threat for Russia comes to its own border from NATO, notionally speaking, okay, hypothetically speaking. It's only a possibility. But what happens in the mind of an autocrat? The threat becomes real in his own imagination. So that's something which he simply cannot allow to happen in his neighborhood. And with Zellensky in power, who is a real find, possibly one of the great leaders after Winston Churchill during the Second World War, the kind of fortitude that he has personally been demonstrating and the leadership that he has actually given the Ukrainian society and the people has been absolutely admirable. Eventually he may lose, and it would be really very surprising if he doesn't realize it himself. He knows it all. So the world is actually waiting with bated breath to see what he's going to do, how the end game is going to be. But what apparently Putin didn't bargain for is that the kind of resistance that has been put up by the Ukrainian society as a whole, the people in general, not just the Ukrainian army. And in that resistance had been fortified and emboldened and facilitated by the inspiring leadership that Zelensky has provided, which has really come as a great surprise. For the Western world, it's a kind of pleasant surprise. In the circumstances, it's really very difficult to use that term pleasant, but the kind of resistance, what the Western world has not been able to do with Putin, with all his intransigence and systematic mischiefs that he has been engaged against the Western world throughout in the past few years, possibly with the exception of Trump regime period, the period in America when Trump was actually leading, heading the government. That's something that now that the Western world is possibly, they may not be exactly be happy, they don't really seem to be happy, but they are really, they've actually developed a lot of admiration for Zelensky as a leader, which is only to be expected. Let's not make a mistake. With the overwhelming power that Russia has, Russia is likely to win this war, if winning is the term. I don't really want to use the word vanquishing and all that, because we all still have a lot of, we all still have some kind of wishful thinking that Ukraine somehow will ward off the victory of Russia. But eventually, Russia may gain the upper hand, and they may, with their overwhelming superiority, they may subdue Ukraine. That's very much likely to happen. I mean, it doesn't really take a Socrates' brain to say that. But what would happen after that? By the theoretical win that Russia may have, still I'm inclined to believe that they are going to lose everything, quite a lot of things actually. They may not be able to Ukraine is going to become a thorn in their flesh with the kind of insurgency that's going to be, which is surely going to be quite powerful and very forceful. It's going to be very difficult for any government to govern the country with a firm hand. So the society is going to be destabilized, that's for sure. Destabilized at least for some time, till such time Putin is going to be ruling over Russia. Now, with the kind of pressure that the whole international community has exerted, the whole world, it seems, it's as though the whole world actually has risen in unison against the Russians. That's what really happens when it actually shocks the conscience of the whole world. The reaction really becomes very spontaneous, basically, which is what is actually being seen right now, including in Russian society with the kind of protest. In fact, there is a Russian parliamentarian who has objected to this, who has actually said that the war should not be going on like this. And there are a couple of oligarchs in Russia who have actually said, who have talked against the war. So, with this kind of protest, with this kind of arousal, the whole world against the war, there is no way Russia or Putin would be able to retain the same strength that he has had. This would, after the war, on balance, Putin is going to find that he has possibly lost. Not necessarily in very tangible, even in tangible terms, actually, with the kind of sanctions that has been imposed, which is not going to be lifted anytime soon by the Western world. He's going to find himself on the losing side. He's going to find it a lot more difficult to administer even Russia. He is not going to be able to wield so much influence as he has been wielding so far with all the countries, including his newfound ally, China. China is the cleverest player in all this. China knows where to keep which country, and they are not going to show their cards. Make it open to everyone. They are not going to make it very obvious. They will just wait and watch as to how it develops. If Russia is going to be weakened, which I do think that it's going to be economically over a period of time, then China would play its cards accordingly, and China will not be in a hurry to antagonize the West beyond a point of no return, because it's an interdependent world now. So they are not going to be standing by the side of Russia unconditionally. In fact, they would actually try to extract whatever they can from Russia when it becomes really weak. Okay. After all, Russia is only a $1.5 trillion economy right now. So, on one side, militarily, Russia may still win, but still it will lose in terms of its inability to administer Ukraine, govern Ukraine through a proxy government. Secondly, the other countries around Russia, including supposedly its friend Kazakhstan, all of those countries, there are so many satellites, there are so many erstwhile Soviet Union states. They are going to be a little wary about Russia and Putin's attitude in particular. In fact, if you remember, the old timers would remember, China used to call Soviet Union in those days the hegemonists, wanting to dominate the entire region. That's something possibly Putin right now wishes to do, but he is not right in his assumption that it would be still possible for Russia to do that. Those days are really gone. With the political alliances and equations among the Euro nations and the whole concomitant nations all over the world. So it's that kind of simplistic theory will not really work anymore for Putin, and he doesn't really seem to realize that. So, but he will be forced to realize once the war is over, if the economy is going to take its beating in Russia, in spite of the fact that they seem to have built a huge foreign exchange reserve for exigencies like this. Um, I'm no economist to actually talk in great detail about this, but from what all the economists say, it's not going to be really easy for Russia to keep it stable, their economic situation. So it's going to really take a beating, and the inflation is going to rise, and people may see economics is the basis of everything. Um, Bill Clinton said, "Economy is stupid." I mean, you just uh, keep the economy sound, then people are going to be okay. If the economy is not good, um, if people, if the population, the population of any country, uh, if they are going to be economically not good, not sound, um, then that's going to cause a lot of restlessness and the conducive conditions for revolutions to start. Now, those conditions in Russia, it's going to be quite possible that such conditions are going to emerge in Russia. So the opposition uh, by the population against Putin's regime, is going to become really fierce. It's going to be considerably strengthened, and so Putin is going to have a lot of problems on his hand within Russia itself. Number one, and so it's basically a lose proposition for Putin from whatever angle one looks at. Economically, see, he can't be really going for war again and again against other countries, neighboring countries. For example, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, all those countries are there. And now Poland, Finland, Switzerland. See, these are all countries which have actually chosen to be really neutral throughout on any political issues. But here, in this case, the overwhelming sentiment has been such that, in support of Ukraine against Russia, that these countries have all talked openly against Russia, and even Sweden is actually providing arms and all that. So much for Putin's warfare. So it's going to be a lose-lose proposition for Putin. So in a way, though we don't really like to entertain the idea of talking about it as a blessing in disguise, that's what it's going to be for the whole world. But in the case of Ukraine, it has had to pay a heavy price, which is really very unfortunate. But eventually, my strong conviction is that Ukraine is going to be able to stand on its own feet, free from Russian domination and all that, over a period of time, but it's going to take some time. The churning process will have to actually take place within Ukraine, with the insurgency, the fight against the Russians, and a leader like Zellensky there always actually in the background against the Russians. Eventually, I think they will be able to gain their own freedom and independence and be able to stand on their own legs, and they will come out quite stronger for all the difficulties that they are actually facing right now. So, God bless Ukraine. We can all actually pray for the welfare of all those Ukrainian citizens and others, all those people, innocent people there. We can only hope that only minimum damage is caused to the average citizenry in Ukraine. Thank you very much. We can actually keep talking about it. We can talk a lot about this, discuss from time to time. One of the things that we should all be aware of, we can all do, is to never let the momentum slip against the activities of the Russians. We can all do our little bit towards that end, and we can continue to discuss things, and let us encourage sharing of opinions through whatever forum that we can. So please do share this video if you think it's actually worthwhile. I do hope to talk to you again soon, possibly in a couple of days or so. We'll keep the conversation going. Thank you. Take care. God bless you all.